I haven't met you. And wow, that was loud. So we have sent out, and if you haven't seen it on Zoom, a copy of the agenda that just has items that we want to make sure that we get to and talk through. If we get through these things, we would love to hear additional things. If we don't get through everything and you have comments that you were unable to make, please call us, email us, whatever it is, because we want to get all of the comments out there that we possibly can. Last time on, was it Friday? Thursday. Oh, who knows? On Thursday last week, we started with number 1 as the Treasury Department guidance. Oh, wait, this is the homeowner's assistance fund. Here. That's yours, actually. Thank you. Also an important program, homeowner's assistance fund. Okay, so last time we started with place, and then we went to process, and then we went to scoring. And today we're flipping that because we did not, as anticipated, get all the way through to the bottom of it, and we want to make sure we have a robust discussion on the scoring piece. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our tax credit staff. And Sarah, why don't you take it away?
Sure. I think I know most of you, Sarah Dakota, and I'm the LIHTC allocation manager. And other staff we have here is Pamela Otto, who's our assistant manager, Kirk Benner, who is our asset management specialist, and Kelly Schultz, who is the compliance manager. Also with us today, we have Michelle Grimes from the Department of Economic Development. Did anyone got it?
Sir, one thing I would like to note is when people speak, please tell us who you are. We are recording it, and it's the people who are in this room, the other people can't really see. So that way we'll be able to make sure everybody knows who the comments are coming from. Thanks.
So just a little bit of background. We've been doing a lot of research to prepare for this, looking at approximately, we've narrowed it down to about 12 other states that are around us or have similar structures to what we do at NIFA, so sister agencies, I guess you could say. And we've done a lot of research there, looked back through prior meeting notes and just comments that we've received over the last year or so to come up with some topic items. And obviously, as Shannon mentioned, I'm sure you have other things you'd like to discuss. So we'll go ahead and jump into it and start with the ensuring reasonable development costs. We talked about this, we started talking about this a little bit last week. We did notice a significant change this year when we lowered those points, those efficiency points that are tied to those ensuring those reasonable development costs when they went from 12 to 6. We saw an obvious change that you did not have to get all of those points and still be awarded a development. So there was that major change made, but we still would like to hear suggestions for how, as developers and as housing partners, you feel would be a good way for us to measure those development costs and make sure that we're being good stewards of the credits. And again, please, if you can, introduce yourself when you speak. Not everybody is. Friends, come on, I know you're dying.
Well, I mean, just an observation on, we turned in 4 projects and we got 2 funded. And so going through and reviewing the scoring process this last round, and by the way, thank you for the 2 that we got funded out there. We appreciate that greatly. It became real obvious that the reduction from 12 to 6 made a huge difference on the points. It brought a lot of other categories into play that haven't really been that significant in the past. We had 2 acquisition rehab projects that we turned in. And actually the cost per square foot on the one that did not get funded was better, more efficient than the one that did get funded. What got funded was we got points because one was a senior project and it was also in a town under 5,000. So that one scored significantly better than the project that was, in North Platte, which was a larger one and actually needed less rehab to it. So those cost efficiency points definitely, just in those two areas, brought other scoring criteria to the forefront a lot more than I think they have in the past. So I know a lot of the comments in the past have been senior projects don't get enough points out there. And I'm not saying they don't, I'm just saying those points are a bigger factor now out there since the cost efficiencies have been reduced to 6. But that's just my observation of what we turned in this last round, how they scored, and how the scoring came out.
Rob Woodling, Foundation Development. I'd be curious to know in the analysis of the other 12 states, wherever we looked at the whatever silo we're in, with the system we use, how many units per tax credit do we produce versus those other states? And so I would just take a look at that to see if we're on what side of that equation we're on.
Yeah, that's a really good thing to look at. We'll do that. I definitely don't have that available off the top of my head. So it's a good suggestion.
One of the things I sit on the AHTC committee for Federal Home Loan Bank of Topeka. So we look at Colorado, we analyze Colorado, Oklahoma, Kansas, and Nebraska out there for those 4 states. And Colorado is a real outlier on their costs. I mean, it's not one you can compare. Even on the Federal Home Loan Bank, looking at AHP funds, they look at the tax credits. I mean, you're looking at over $300 a square foot on anything you build in Colorado. But does tie in a little bit to one of your later scoring things down here. Colorado is very heavy into green standards, the lead. So as we get to that, I probably have more to say on why I don't think that's a good idea to go down that road, just from a cost standpoint out there.
Well, so in the past, we had heard that there is way too much focus on efficiency because we want to find that right balance, right? We don't want to build developments that are not going to last the entire they're just not going to hold up, right? So in the past, their criticism was we have way too much focus on efficiency. Lowering those points obviously brought out those other categories were were more pivotal. So does anybody have any ideas, other ways we could look at cost comparisons? I know some states have caps. Anyone have any suggestions?
Jake Hoppy with Hobby Development. Well, a couple of observations. Look, you're making a point about development costs versus eligible basis. And so there is a tension between sort of your overall efficiency of the project and what I would characterize as sort of resource stacking, which is not negative or positive, just an observation where and it became especially challenging with DEs. I mean, in the last round with DE running out of funds, where you're kind of being incentivized to pursue the max amount of additional resources through DED or otherwise if you can. DED ended up running out of funds and putting a lot of projects in a bind. But it's partially a little bit of the structure of how using eligible basis as your measure of efficiency skews in that direction. The other thing just on that I've thought about is if there are some of these other, if you want to continue to reinforce some of these other policy objectives like mixing incomes and things like that, again, using eligible basis as your metric makes it challenging. I mean, you're always going to then have a tension between the percent that you made eligible and your ineligible percentage. So I think it would be interesting to consider a total development cost as your metric, and then, but that I have not done a ton of thinking about what's the ramifications of that might be. But I think in pursuing some of these additional policy objectives or efficiently using some of the other resources from DE and otherwise.
Yes. So that's one of the things that we've noticed is different states use eligible basis, total development costs. So that is why you'll see that next, which is obviously part of this discussion too. Total development costs, I mean, land obviously would not be included because that's a huge, I mean, that would have to be excluded. But does anyone have any comments, feedbacks, concerns about one way or another changing from looking at eligible basis to looking at total development costs, less land.
Sarah, this is Kathy Messner. I want to go back to that first point. I think that I do think that there needs to be some kind of policy discussion regarding whether you want to be having projects funded that don't get any efficiency points. And I know that people have been excited because they think the efficiency points have outweighed other items, but I think the rollback this time around swung it too far the other direction, because yes, you did have projects with no efficiency points, and it appears to me that there ought to be some and I'm not necessarily arguing about how efficiency points are determined, but I do think that we've kind of lost sight of protecting the credits that we do have if we just say we're going to have these efficiency categories, but you can still get funded by not hitting any of them.
Well, and Kath, one of the things to keep in mind with that is that you're right, there were projects that were funded that did not have efficiency points. And what happens then is they are limited to the credits that they can have based on the one standard deviation over you can't get credits over one standard deviation in any of the categories. So we did actually have one project that did receive credits or did receive an award, but then they returned their credits in first round because they were not able to make their project work with those reduced credits. So I can see where you're coming from, and then that can occur. I mean, we can have that happen, and we had that happen when it was just 12 or when it was 12 points also, but not as often.
So
So you're doing it to yourself, please.
Cobb Lieberman, Bridge for Development. I think different states do it different ways. I agree that total development cost in Missouri, they use 221 D3, I think, or 221. I can't remember there's a HUD maximum development cost tag that they use, and that's a way to sort of, make sure the projects come in underneath a certain metric. But if there's extraordinary circumstances, both on the cost side or the source side, I think that's something you need to take into account. And perhaps looking at the efficiency of the credits, like what is the credit per, unit is another measure that you could use. And I think you guys track that as well. But let's say, like, for a lot of our work we bring in a lot of extraordinary financing from HUD to do, public housing transformation or other things that are expensive on their face to meet other requirements. If NIFA would be willing to take into account those extraordinary sources that are coming in and the extraordinary costs, I think that would allow some projects to, be treated, in a way that might be fitting to the work they're doing. So while I agree that there has to be some sort of metric to compare how efficiently the resources are being used, if we're bringing more money to the table that's extraordinary, where there's costs that are brought on by an overriding public purpose, I think that should be taken into account.
This is Teresa Kyle. In thinking about all this, okay, so when we think about NIFA, we're thinking about spreading out the credits to as many units as possible, correct? We're trying to get as many units out there as possible for the least amount of credits.
While providing quality.
Right.
While
I mean, I think the
providing
board,
quality.
yeah, the board would not say that. The board would say they're trying to get the best bang for the buck with quality, which means the projects are going to last longer in better shape.
And also the board likes the idea of services. I mean, when we talked about, when we had the board session, there was a lot of talk about having really enriched.
Which I
projects.
think that services is gonna be a huge topic here too, because of the cost that it adds to the project and the operating costs. But what I'm getting at is, okay, so you're metric with LIHTC per occupant based on bedrooms, okay? That can be based on, that kind of is based on an eligible basis. And that one measurement, I believe, works well for the credits, okay? But then when you look at, that means that a lot of stuff are taken either out of eligible basis, which really is eligible, but people are playing that game, or it means we're using a lot of other funding sources to drive that down, okay? So if you have that as one element, then maybe the other one should be based on development cost, not eligible basis, making the two separate measurements. Because every time you use eligible basis, basically you're basing it a lot on the same thing, like cost per square foot on eligible basis is not a true cost of what it costs to build that, okay? But LIHTC per occupant, that's an efficiency number for LIHTC. But when you're saying cost per square foot or cost per unit, I don't think that should be based on eligible basis because it's the same thing. It's the same measurement all three times. I don't have a solution, but what I'm saying is, I think you should give an incentive for not needing as many credits and going out and using some other funding sources. But I also think you should give incentive for not building cheaper, that's not what I want, but building cost efficient housing based on what the costs are. And I'm not sure how to do that, but I'm thinking you should kind of split all efficiency measurement shouldn't be based on eligible basis only. It should have some different benchmarks. And I think that will kind of help with not achieving anything in the efficiency points.
Brent Williams, I'll say my name this time, sorry. On the efficiency, I think there's several points there that we could look at. And I agree with Teresa, I don't have the answer to it, but some of the things to look at is just to go back and look at the intended use of the tax credit program itself. It's really designated for 40 to 60% of very immediate income. Now, through income averaging, you've been able to expand that some, but in some states, other states have not adopted the average income, and I think that's probably the smartest decision they made, was to not do that at this point until you get some real direction from the IRS. But
Do it at your own
things-
risk here.
yeah, things where I think we've lost some efficiencies is trying to fit those 30% units into a LIHTC project. There's existing programs for the 30% units. They're underfunded, but so's the LIHTC. Trying to put market rate units into a LIHTC is a feel good in theory only. In reality, it doesn't work to do that. Syndicators do not want to syndicate a project that has market rate units. When they do their underwriting, as should any developer, those market rate units need to be underwritten at the tax credit rates. Because it's historically proven, they've been out there long enough now that within 5 years, your market rate units will have the same rent as your tax credit units. And in every place except for really Lincoln and Omaha, your fair market rents are tax credit rents in the small communities right now. There really isn't a difference out there. So you really only benefit in Lincoln and Omaha to do some market rate units, and they end up being tax credit rate rents anyway within 5 years. And they're underwritten that way by the syndicators out there when they do their underwriting to see if they'll buy them. So why it's a feel-good thing, I don't think in reality, when you put it into place, market rate units just absorbs additional tax credits that it doesn't need to. I know you don't get tax credits for them, but people figure, developers play the cost game of where they put things. Hey, we're all chasing points. I mean, let's just be honest about it.
Well,
you know, and
that's
that's
the
what,
whole point of a competitive process, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you're trying to beat the person next to you.
and most, efficiency of points also, then you can take a look at, and it's a much deeper discussion than we can probably have today, but the formula NIFA uses for its state credits allocation. It would be great to see that maybe change to match what the legislation that was written was intended to be, and not the way it is today. That would allow you, that's going to use up more state credits. And I know you've got state credits into 4% deals, so that's got to be weighed against that. But right now, in all honesty, between the state credits and the federal credits, and I've been doing this way too many years, I've yet to run across a project that I really can't make work without any home funds. Right now, I mean, honestly feel in several areas, DED is subsidizing NIFA out there. And all we're doing when we put home funds in a project is we're chasing points. I can make I have not had a project since you've had the state credit that I can't make work with 0 home funds out there. They're a great source, but we put them in there so that we can take money, we can take everything out of eligible basis to score better. That's the only reason we use home funds. And I've been doing this for 20 years out there. Another thing from a cost efficiency, it would use less credits. You say you've done the research of 10 to 20 surrounding states.
Well, we're still doing it.
Yeah, well, and you do your research, and on your application fee, you're competitive out there for what it costs to turn an application in. Everybody would like to see it be less. Some states, when nonprofits turn them in, have a lower fee that they get as being a nonprofit. Where you're not competitive and where it takes up more credits because we have to put more debt on the project is your compliance fees. Your compliance fees continue to be anywhere from 4 to 10 times surrounding states.
We do, that is one of the things that we look at and talk about. Our fees are, when we did a review and we looked at North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, Oklahoma, Kansas, we threw in Colorado because they have some good ideas, not necessarily because it's a comparable, those policies wouldn't necessarily fly here. We have Utah. So we looked at a kind of a mixture. There may have been, I may be missing someone, but that is one thing we looked really closely at is fees. And while our application, that 1% application fee is higher, our overall, that 5%
Right.
is significantly lower than other states. But yes, you're right. We also did find that the compliance fees were higher in comparison to other states.
And that's an issue I brought up for 10 years now, just that.
We talk about it internally a lot and trying to figure out how to make sure that
But
we.
when your compliance fees are $5,000 a year higher than the next state, that's $5,000 less I have to put debt service on the project. So I need more credits to cover that debt service,
We've got to make sure we can.
which means I actually got to go get more home funds to do it. That's the other way where I really think DED is subsidizing NIFA, because I can't carry more debt on the project, but I can go get, I can go apply for some home funds to help cover that up.
Rob Living Foundation's development. I just did some quick math on the 2020 rounds between Iowa and Nebraska. Iowa got about 9 million in credits, gave out about 9 million credits and produced 524 units on 9 million. So about 17,175 dollars of tax credits per unit. In the 2020 Nebraska rounds 1 and 2, I didn't do Crane because I couldn't find it. That's not. With about $4 million in credits, we did 443 units.
So we're pretty efficient.
With the current system, that's my point. That's about 9,000 per unit.
Deeper into
This is
that.
Fred Hoppy.
Hi, Fred.
I don't think you ought to confuse cost of construction with the, I guess, efficiency of credit or longevity of the product. When you're doing your compliance, you ought to be making sure that the units are being kept up. And that's a whole different ball of wax than throwing money at the front end. You know, you can build a high-end product at the front end and let it go to hell just as easy as a reasonably priced product. I think it's really important that we don't overbuild these units. Rather, they got to be maintained as they go along. And, you know, the market we're in, affordable, you don't need granite countertops. They don't have to be all brick. You know, you can use construction techniques and materials that last or can be replaced over time as part of normal maintenance. And so I'm concerned about high cost product rather than appropriate and reasonable product for the affordable marketplace. I mean, you don't build for affordable, you don't build A+ apartments. You build B- apartments. That's what's appropriate in my book. And you got to look at that in efficiency. And then you got to keep it maintained.
This is Brent. I'm sorry. I would agree with Fred on the cost efficiency of building up front. You can't build an A+. I would hope it's at least a B out there. But as far as maintaining long-term, these projects are set up in such a way that they do not cash flow well. They can't. I mean, the agencies don't allow that. There are set reserves, and we set our reserves and higher, and our maintenance costs higher than what the minimums are. But after 15 years, there is not enough money in the project, even if you've been maintaining them. After 15 years, people, I mean, carpets need to be replaced, appliances need to be replaced, HVAC systems need to be replaced out there. They don't build HVAC units for 15 years anymore. 20 years ago, that was a different story. Today, you know, if you get 7 years out of a hot water heater, you've done great. So you've already probably, you know, used a lot of your reserves before year 15 just to keep stuff up to date. Nobody's putting in a hot water system, you know, a hot water heater that had, you know, you can't find it, but has a 20-year warranty on it. No one can afford to do that. So I agree, cost-wise up front, we need to watch what we spend, but you are even maintaining your units, and I think we do a good job of that. The reserves that you have in your project cannot take care of everything after, you know, at some point in time, there's going to need to be a major facelift to make them marketable, or your units are going to go and set empty because new projects are being built in the same, you know, in the same communities during that period of time. And if they're going to choose something that has, you know, 15, 20-year-old appliances and everything else in it, and worn out carpet and paint, they're going to choose the new units out there. And so you're jeopardizing long-term the viability of a tax credit project that they've committed to probably 45 years on. South Dakota has seen that so recently to where they're actually given points for rehab projects now, because they're losing so many of their units to market rate, and their vacancy rates are so high on their tax credit units. And I think this year they gave 30 points, and they're upping it to 40 points next year.
We'll move on to that.
Sure, yeah.
Here shortly. And I'm sure you all miss Kelly's team coming out to do the inspections and send you your letters. Kelly, I mean, next year we're doing exteriors on.
We're doing exteriors this year, 1, yep, congressional 1.
So you'll start getting some if you're in congressional district 1, and
Well, 3 will be next year, yes.
yeah, so then 3 you'll have, you'll get to see Kelly's team again, so, and get those letters to make sure you're maintaining everything. Anything else on just the general idea of ensuring reasonable development costs? I mean, we've talked about the benefits to using total development, or the benefits or issues with using total development cost versus eligible basis. Anything on that before we move on?
Rob Woodling, Foundations Development again. I just wanted to follow up on my earlier comment. So I think what you'll find is if you switch to a cap, like a HUD designated cap, that people will build up to that cap every time. And so using those numbers per tax credit per unit that I used earlier. So in 2020, rounds 1 and 2, we created 443 units. If we used Iowa's average, we would have created 232 units. So that'd be, I mean, it's almost 50%. And people will.
And that
build
doesn't
to
include Crane.
That doesn't include Crane. No.
Jake Hoppy again from Hoppy Development, just following up on Teresa's comments. I mean, they are somewhat redundant measurements that we have. So I think so both of these comments here are recognizing different elements of different types of projects, ones that have significant amount of maybe additional services, significant amount of additional resources. I mean, that sort of different type of project could be captured to some extent by having a measurement of like LIHTC per occupant consistent with what we have, and then a total development cost. Those would capture somewhat different elements of projects that I think just some of the comments were interesting in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, in the past, we had a cost, eligible basis per bedroom, which skewed. I mean, you're right, each of those measurements do skew to one or another.
Well, right now, they're quite redundant. Right now, you're basically your basis per unit and LIHTC per occupant are very similar. You're not going to have very many projects that are far out of line with one versus the other.
This is Brent Williams with Excel Development. I guess I would disagree with that. But before I do that, I just want to reiterate what Rob said. We work in 2 states that do have cost caps. And you look at virtually every application that comes in, they're within dollars of what the total cost cap is for the project. That's where they're at because they can maximize their developer fee also on that. So I don't think a cost cap is a good way to go. And they're actually having some problems with those cost caps this last year or two with the increase in prices. But when you take your tax credits per unit, obviously building your 1 and 2 bedroom units scores you the best. If you take your tax credits per occupant, then you want 4 bedroom houses out there. So I think the two are diametrically opposed to each other from a scoring standpoint. It's which way do you want to go to try and score some points, but you can't get both. If you go to 4 bedroom houses, your tax credits per unit is going to get killed by a 1 bedroom apartments out there, which is basically where Iowa has gone to. And now all you see built in Iowa are 40 unit, 1 building apartments. And that's, in metropolitan areas. In metropolitan areas, that's the only thing getting funded in Iowa.
Okay. Anything else before we move on?
Sarah, this is Kathy Messner again. I'm not exactly sure that I think maybe what Brent was saying there was interpreting a little bit about what Teresa was saying. I think what Teresa was saying was keep the tax credits per occupant measurement in place because that is based on eligible basis, and on the other efficiencies go to total development costs. I think the total development cost minus land costs gives developers a little less room for manipulation. But the other thing that enters into that process, and since this is a joint meeting with DED, I think it also ends up, it kind of goes to Brent's point earlier, is that we use the gap funding to manipulate our numbers on the tax credit side. And so if we're going to continue with having DED gap financing, maybe we're better off to go back to having some kind of a cap on those funds in order to get a more realistic picture of what the actual costs are, as opposed to using the eligible basis and then shoving money into the gap financing in order to bring down our eligible basis. So I just, it seems to me that Teresa.
Going down to Park Plaza to help Crystal with some stuff.
Okay.
This is Michael William Housing. Don't overlook the fact that efficiency really didn't come into play these last two rounds. 11 of the 14 projects awarded were seniors, and 13 of the 14 were mixed income. You had to have one of those two, if not both of those two, to really get an award this time. And it's just the way I look at it anyway.
Lowering those points from 12 to 6 made a
Made a big difference.
big difference. That's
Yeah.
right.
And then I think it's a question of, in those amenities sections, do we weight the points the way we're weighting them now? Or there's some points that we weight more or less? And these might be things that over years we have to make decisions about, because you can't just change everything all at once. I think and have people understand what's going to be a successful project.
Well, I think let's move on to re-syndication versus preservation. We've heard a lot of comments over the recent, especially years, about the LIHTC, the credit being a production, to produce new units. However, as Brent mentioned, there also are those parties that think that we need to make sure that we're doing plenty of maintaining and preserving the affordable credits. So one of the things we just wanted to talk about right from the very beginning is make sure that people really understand the preservation points. So you do have to, you're preserving to get the points. It's not just a simple re-syndication project. It's actually preserving a HUD project that has is in danger of creating a claim on a federal mortgage insurance fund. If the project has existing project-based rental assistance agreement in place. So if you're updating that to preserve that contract, or if the development met the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation as interpreted by the National Park Service, and involves the use of historic credits. So these are the only things you would get points for. And we don't have to dig down and deep into the actual points, but we can talk about, there's strong feelings on either side of this. One thing that I would like to bring up is that we found that many of the states are limiting when a project can come back in to 20 or 25 years before they can come back in. I don't know if there's any discussion about something like that. Instead of the concern that, obviously, Brent, your feelings are they need to be rehabbed at 15 years, but then we have that opposite side. So if you could just have some discussion about that, that would be great.
Hey, this is Fred Hoppy from Hoppy Development again. And I'm one of those that's very, very, very strongly feel that this is a new production product. The program was developed to develop new housing. And at the end of 15 years, well, first of all, I'm not aware of any projects in Nebraska that aren't committed to 30, right? And, if you can't figure your maintenance into your pro formas, what it really takes to maintain the units, that's shame on you in my book. And at the end of the 15 years, I think it's a travesty to re-syndicate any of those. At the end of 30, what I'm saying is, any way you cut the mustard, we ought to be building product that lasts 30 years. The sticks and bricks. Now, I admit an HVAC system may not last 30 full years, but when that goes out of the program, it's still affordable housing. Even if it goes out of the program, it may not have to have a 60% median income person in it because it's not being regulated at the time, but it's still affordable housing. And we need all the housing we can get in the state of Nebraska. And to put the tax credits to redoing housing that's already existing, to me, is just inappropriate, and it's not what the program was designed for. And obviously, I feel very strongly about it. And because it, if you're taking a building that was not housing and making it housing, then that's appropriate. But to redo, re-syndicate, if you will, an apartment building that was affordable housing to continue to be affordable housing, in my books, completely inappropriate and not fit with the program.
Fred, that you did make a comment about how after 30 years that it's still that the rents are still affordable. I think that maybe in rural areas or non-metro areas we're finding that, but in recent years in metro areas, we are seeing that those rents are becoming not affordable any longer.
They can go to market. I don't care. It's still housing.
Okay.
You're making if you put your tax credits on new construction, then you're creating new affordable housing, and the 30-year-old product can go market, and they'll have to upgrade it themselves to take it market. It's still housing.
Any other comments, feedback on that?
You want to go first?
I was gonna wait for Kathy and then I was. Rob Building Foundation Development, I would really agree with Fred. One less really. But I agree.
Brent Williams with Excel Development, and I would really disagree out there for several reasons. One, I mean, if you're going to address the whole thing of rehab and preservation, and you don't think you should have a re-syndication, you shouldn't have a preservation. Why should the LIHTC program and NIFA bail out HUD? HUD has their own programs. 4 points for bailing out HUD, who has a troubled project, is, does not make a lot of sense. So, if you're going to denigrate the rehabilitations, re-syndication, you need to do the same thing to the rehab. The only possible exception is, maybe if you're saving a half contract out there, Section 8 contract, but even then, since when is that really NIFA's responsibility to take care of HUD projects? Again, that falls in a whole different department than NIFA does. But rehab, look up the term aggregator, and you find that number one of the highest growing investment activities out there in the country today are aggregators, aggregated investments. And those are the people that are coming in after year 15 and buying out the tax credit projects and taking them to market rate. Yes, there's a 30 and 45-year WERA on them. They have figured out how to do it. And you've got more than 12,000 units a year coming out of the tax credit program by these people. And it's just growing exponentially every year of how they do that and taking them to market rate. Yes, it's more in metropolitan areas than it is in rural areas, the Lincoln and Omahas. But that is one of the fastest growing investments out there today, is to gobble up tax credit projects after year 15.
Okay, my point was, this is Fred Hoppy
Well, you're
again.
losing them.
My point is, you take those same tax credits and put it in new product, and you got new product for affordable housing in your town. In the same town.
You've lost.
You don't have to redo 15-year products. And no, we should not. And if you're disagreeing with me, Brett, I'm surprised, because I don't believe we ought to be bailing out HUD projects. I don't believe any of that.
No,
I'd be using the credit for building new construction.
Todd
Well, I mean, I kind of,
Lieberman.
Todd Lieberman, Brent Shore, I agree with the first two gentlemen that spoke to some extent. I think that they're maybe targeting a shallower credit, like a 4% credit with some other additional resources at renovation seem to be a more appropriate use of resources than the scarce 9% credits, which are generally necessary to build the full new construction. So I would, I guess, fall on that side of the fence.
Mike with Millennium Housing, also fall on the side of the fence. We need to put some credits into rehabbing existing tax credit units. I mean, we have tax credit units that are 20 years old. They need to have something done to them. If you don't, it's just hard to keep going forward with them.
You can't keep them rented. You know, so now you've got tax credit units that are vacant.
This is Kathy. I'm having a hard time with what you're saying, Brent. First of all, we don't put tax credit units in places, even new tax credit units into places where there isn't a need for them. I don't think we have trouble filling either new units or old units. At least I don't see that. I really don't see that. The other thing I don't see is I don't see major degradation of the tax credit units that we've built. And the reserves that we have been adequate. A couple of years ago, we had an early project that that came out of the tax credit program because we didn't have the long-term LURA on it. And we turned it over in spick and span new condition and turned over a reserve of about $300,000 with it to our managing member. So, and I just don't believe in the legislative history that the tax credit program was intended to rehab tax credit units at the end of 15 years. I just, I mean, honestly, I don't see it all. I don't see every unit around the state or around the country, but we just have not had the experience that these units are in, can't be taken care of as you go. And to the extent that you have to put large amounts of money into them at the end of 15 years. So I'm sitting on the same fence with Fred on this one.
This is Brent with Excel again, and Kathy, I would agree. We've had a couple projects that have come out of the 15-year that were early projects. So their LURA was up, and yeah, they have been turned over to the nonprofit without any re-syndication. I'm not saying that every project needs to be re-syndicated out there, but there are projects that do need to go through that re-syndication to make them a viable project out there. That what you use, and maybe it's 20 years, not 15 years moving forward. You go, okay, anything built from, from now on, it's a 20-year or an 18, or it's a 25-year out there. But know that going into the program, when you turn your application in, that in the future, it's going to be a minimum of 20 years. I am fine with that. South Dakota has that. They've implemented is 20 years out there. But not every, I don't know the criteria you take a look at to come up with what is a good re-syndication and what's not. Not every project needs it. I'll readily admit that. We've got several that we've not turned in. They don't need it out there.
It seems to me that's a function, this is Fred Hoppy again, that's a function of your pro forma from the start and how you project out your operating costs and your rents and stuff. And you ought to be projecting that at the end of 20 years, you need so much money to renovate your units. So, I think that's a failure of the maintenance and maybe the failure of the NIFA monitoring your units over the time and how they're maintained and so forth.
Excuse me, Fred.
Anyhow,
Does anyone think that, I mean, I know we haven't been monitored for a couple of years, but do you feel like NIFA is too easy on you when they come to monitor projects? No, I'm serious. I don't work in that area, so I'm not, they're laughing, but I'm being serious.
This is Brent with Excel, and to be honest with you, I don't think NIFA is too lenient. They're definitely not too strict. But they're not the only ones looking at it. You got the syndicators coming in every year and monitoring them too. You know, there's usually multiple people coming to look at those units on a yearly basis. Even if NIFA is only once every 3 years, the syndicators are out there looking at them on an annual basis out there. And we get from them their reports of, you know, what they think ought to be done to make changes out there. So no, I think there's multiple steps, you know, in doing that.
This is Mike with Holy Name Housing. We have a building, 37 units. It's past 15. It needs a $50,000 boiler. It needs a new elevator and elevator shaft. That elevator can only be worked on by somebody who's retired. It's such an old system. And it's got $300,000 of debt on it. I would imagine we don't rent those 1 or 2 bedroom units for anything more than $450 to $450 a month. Now I could empty out the unit and charge more rent, so I could cover more debt and replace some of those things. Or I can go in for more tax credits and rehab it.
Well, Mike, the other things you run across that you say a development's a poor developer, it's performa. Tell me how in your performa that in year 7 or 8, the city decides to raise their utility rates by 60%. You know, the insurance rates double out there. You know, you have hailstorms 2 years in a row, and all of a sudden your insurance costs have doubled out there. You can't put that in a performa, 15-year performa day one. And those things are real, they do happen. I mean, I'm sorry, Fred, but we don't live in a perfect world.
Well, I thank you for the discussion on this. I think that it's obviously people feel very strongly one way or another. So thank you for the discussion. Just because we do have limited time, if we could continue moving on.
Sarah, could we take up one other part of that discussion, and that is whether if you're going to award or allow rehab projects to be awarded tax credits, whether they're scored in the same pool as new construction.
Jake Hoppy from Hoppy Development. That was going to be my observation too, Kathy, is that you're looking at rehab projects very substantially in line with new construction projects, or, you know, substantial rehabilitation of a non-housing building into a housing building. So when you're looking at that, I think some of the frustration you're hearing is when you're looking at that as a proposed project, and you're really proposing to update a building that is already apartments and spending similarly in line with the conversion or new construction. That's where some of the frustration comes, is that seems like replacing a boiler for $50,000 and some other stuff that I can completely understand, but that's not $80,000, $100,000 a unit worth of work.
This is Teresa, Kyle, and I only have one comment on this. What you built 15 years ago is not what you built today. And reconfiguration, even of the units, I mean, you look at some of the units built back then and what new construction is asking for square footage, there is a difference. I mean, so in my thought, it's a balance. I don't know what the balance is, but rehabs need, they need to be part of this, part of the LIHTC along with new construction, because who's to say 5 to 7 years, your QAP has some things that rehabs just cannot, they're not marketable in their own towns and cities because of the changes of construction material, the changes in, you know, the sizes of the units, the changes in the requirements. I mean, I remember USD didn't allow dishwashers for the longest time. I mean, there's a lot of requirements that change over the years. So if you say no re-syndication of existing housing, I think you're shooting yourself in the foot.
The units aren't marked. Brent Williams with Excel. Yeah, the units become unmarketable compared to the new ones out there. But to your point, I agree with you. We have turned in re-syndication projects successfully and unsuccessfully for the last 5 years. And the one very inconsistent thing that just frustrates us to no end is how NIFA scores them. Their answer has always been, well, it depends on how many of them we get as to whether we score them with new construction or by themselves. Well, that's a load of crap. I'm sorry. It's have a set in your QAP. If you're going to score them with new construction, score them. If you're going to score them separately, score them separately. Set it in the QAP so everybody knows, and it's not a subjective decision round to round by NIFA based on how many rehabs came in. If there's only 2 rehabs come in, we're going to score them with new construction because there's not enough. But if there's 6 rehabs that come in that round, we're going to separate and just score the rehabs against each other for cost efficiencies. And NIFA has done it both ways every round for the last 5 years, depending on the number of rehabs that come in.
You just want it spelled out.
I just want it spelled out. You're either gonna just score rehabs against themselves or you're not,
Well, we.
regardless of the number that come in.
I mean, honestly, we prefer not to score, I mean, rehabs are a completely different animal, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's something we talk about, we're trying to come up with a solution because it's not the same, it's not comparing.
I absolutely 100% agree with you. I just think it's something that the subjectivity should be taken out of it and put in the QAP. This is the way NIFA is going to do it.
Well, we have a way we say we do it, so I appreciate that, that's a good suggestion. Okay, if we could move on to track record really quickly. We've been looking again at looking at other states and in general, just discussing things as a team. We have pretty basic track record. You put the stuff on a piece of paper, you see that then you get your points. I mean, it's we don't dive deep. So we had some suggestions about giving additional points if you're timely with your reporting and you get your cost certification turned in within 60 days or 90 days, or you're meeting your deadlines. Maybe some states do negative points. So if you come in to ask for additional credits, a couple of times, then you'd get negative points. So we're just trying to take the temperature on, we really want to try to beef up the track record and the importance in the track record. I mean, a lot of you are out here have developed a long time. But there's other things that we look at, or we could look at with track record. Is there any feeling one way or another?
Hey, this is Fred Hoppy from Hoppy Development. I think there ought to be a point given if your management has housing certified professionals, HCCPs on the management team. And of course, I'm on the board of the housing certified professionals through, it's kind of run by NAHB, but that would like assure you as well as that the management team's well-trained because the certification process is pretty complex. And it then would also promote the program, which I endorse.
So maybe there's other certifications out there too that we could, I mean, obviously not every, there's other certifications other than just HCCP.
But that was probably the most comprehensive out there. Really is.
Jake Hoppy with Hoppy Development as well, just on a different angle of it. I'm of 2 minds. I mean, I have heard the board speaking about a desire to get additional entrants into developing affordable housing and the need to keep a diverse pool of developers. So I, on some level, am cautious against putting a bunch of requirements or additional points towards developers who have a long track record if you're wanting to keep a robust pool, and it's kind of counterintuitive. I'd love not to have more competition, but for the betterment of affordable housing, I can see that argument. And but then I also see with frustration, there are awards given and, maybe people not, everyone has to write a letter saying that you'll support any gap. Or turning in, and, we asked for more credits on one project, it's sort of not being able to deliver on the projects that you said in the way that you said, and they're wanting there to be some weight or accountability for being able to execute. If you lay out the pro forma, you get the award, and then there's something that comes up such that you can't execute it, that something that you've committed to that's sort of within your control. I see with frustration, that not being accounted for. And then but my last point, I guess, is that this is a messy business, and I can see with folks with the best of intentions, if you're going to be a long-term participant, these things are going to happen. You're going to miss a deadline at some point. There's just no way, if you're making a business out of doing affordable housing, that you're not going to, it would be rare to have a perfect track record, I would imagine.
And I don't think perfect is what is at all what we would
Yeah.
expect at all. But there are some people who don't, that we literally have to chase them down every single month for their quarterly reports.
Yeah.
And that's a little thing, but that's how we track knowing when cost certs are gonna come in and things like that. So, that's just an example. We definitely don't expect perfection, because as much as we strive, we definitely are not perfect. We do our best, and we'll continue to try to do that. Todd?
I think there's always a tension too between, if you have a longer track record, there's bound to be some things that go wrong. So I just want to make sure that you're rewarding people that have done a lot of work in the past, while also not creating a situation where people can't enter the market. I think that's just the two sides of the coin.
Make sure that we're being aware of those unintended consequences.
Exactly. If you're focused too much on the people who've already done work, then you're creating an incentive for people with a thinner track record to potentially score higher. Second thing is places where you have financial penalties for mistakes, like that's like, or not mistakes, but if you're like the cost cert issue, like you're submitting your cost cert later and being, you're essentially rectifying it with fine to some extent. It's almost like a double whammy. Maybe I would think about one or the other.
Well, this is Teresa, and the one thing I wanna is, if you're going to have additional requirements with track record, then you might want to look at what's some of the things like when AHP's deadline is. Okay, because for a reservation, you're not going to be able to get the AHP award in if you received, or same thing with some of the things that we get from DED, not trying to dish anybody, but when you're working with multiple funding sources, you may not get a timely response from that multiple funding and you're waiting on them. And so you can't turn in like a cost cert or a carryover or something, because you're waiting on somebody else, even though you submitted it way within time with that other entity. So that's something to keep in mind, is maybe the deadlines of some of the other funding sources that people are dealing with.
Thank you. Anything else? We appreciate those ideas of things that could be unintended consequences or things to watch out for. Thank you. Well, green standards. We don't want anybody to panic. I at the last meeting, I said, please don't panic. It's not like we expect to totally change every, turn around and give a bunch of points to one certain green standard, but it is something that at absolutely almost every one of our NCHA meetings, green standards are a big part of the message and what they're trying to take a temperature for every state and what they're doing. Right now we have specific items you can choose from in green standards, which I think Robin mentioned that years ago, and that instead of enacting one of these specific types of green standards, they worked with a local architect to come up with some green standards that could be chosen as part of your project. So I'm sure that there's comments about some of these different types of green standards and what that may do to costs.
Fred Happy Development recognize that if you use some of the trademark programs, there's a cost that's associated with it. And LEED, for instance, is a significant cost associated with it. And whereas you can get the same place with some of the other programs, the NAHB, National Green Building Standards is much less costly product and got, same definite guidelines. I'm not familiar with the enterprise product. Energy Star obviously finds itself in equipment and so forth. It's certified at the acquisition point. So using Energy Star materials and supplies speaks for itself. But it also is a little bit in cost efficiency because normally Energy Star is a little tiny bit more expensive than non-Energy Star equipment. So that ought to be kept in mind, but that shakes out somewhere else.
Cindy Wasser with Home Innovation Research Labs. We manage the NGBS Green Certification Program, which is the leading green building program for residential construction. It's based on the ICC 700 National Green Building Standard. I would highly encourage NIFA to consider incorporating third-party green building programs like NGBS. That provides greater assurance of construction quality and that there are healthy and efficient features for the residents of your funded communities. In particular, I advocate for the NGBS because it's affordable, comprehensive, and well suited for affordable housing development. Feel free to reach out to me after this program if you have any specific questions about the NGBS or green building in general. I'm fairly well connected with people at Enterprise as well as LEED if you have questions about those programs as well.
Thank you.
So I would agree, NGBS actually pretty accessible rating system that requires third parties. So there is additional cost with that. Energy Star certification has actually changed as of June 30th and became a little more intensive. So before putting anything in QAP, I would cross-reference some of the changes and the potential costs. Enterprise Green Communities is probably a little bit more intensive than NGBS, but less intensive than LEED, I would say. So, it's going to cost extra money, but those would be my rankings in terms of ease of use.
Jake Hoppy Development. I mean, we're on the HUD project we're pursuing NGBS. It's still 40,000 to 50,000 for both just for the certification and monitoring, not to mention the other potential costs, which are fairly nominal. I mean, it's pretty well tied to 2018, but that's an order of magnitude of it's a fairly straightforward project of the costs associated just with the certification, not with the whatever investments you might need to make or enhancements to the project to meet it, but just for the certification. Very real world example. I mean, and Sarah, we are examining how to, like for instance, put solar in our West Point project. It's very complicated between the syndicator, which we are very fortunate in this case to be working with one who's recognizing the credits from solar. So there is a source for some of that, but incorporating that benefit in a mechanism that accrues to the tenant is very challenging. And that's what we're trying to get figured out. I kind of do like, in some ways, I think the green standards as they are need to be updated. I don't think they're current. I was reviewing, we are reviewing our project, our bond project in Lincoln. We're analyzing it with Lincoln Electric System, like something like geothermal and a high efficiency heat pump. Now, the efficiencies are nearly identical. The cost of geothermal is quite a bit more expensive. A high efficiency heat pump is pretty reasonable. I think there's certainly some review of what those individual choices might be, and maybe some commitment to reviewing them over time to make sure that they're, you know, reasonable and updated. But we've kind of taken that approach of, when we're working with our engineering on analyzing a number of different interventions around the windows, the insulation, the appliance choices. But I am like very concerned. I would be very concerned about going to a green standard that required third-party verification, just because it is, regardless of the project, it's going to add pretty significant costs associated.
This is Rob Woodley, Foundations Development. So I just looked up the verifiers for the National Green Building Standards, and there isn't one in Nebraska. There's one in Iowa and 2 in Colorado, and that's about it. So.
So I would say that in areas where the NGBS is recognized, my team can work closely with partners on the ground to make sure that people are trained and become accredited to be able to do the work. It might be as simple as tapping into the folks that are already HERS raters or Energy Star providers, lead providers, to make sure that they have that additional accreditation to be able to do NGBS green verification. And I would say that there's a real benefit to third-party verification and certification. In terms of NIFA's benefit, it takes staff time and resources off of your agency. You don't have to have your team trained up to do that. You can rely on the expertise and the systems in place at organizations like ours, Home Innovation.
Thank you.
Sarah, this is Kathy Messner. 2 thoughts on this. One is that some states have just gone to doing like a HERS rating on the buildings, because it does give the developer and contractors and the architects some flexibility to do different things. Not everybody ends up doing the same thing in order to hit the right HERS rating, but it gives them some flexibility in different areas to get to the same place. And in some respects, I think that's a good thing. But the other kind of policy thought on all of this is that it seems to me that, and I think a lot of national commentators are looking at this, we can, we continue to try to improve our equipment. We try to improve the products that we put into the buildings, and end up really spending more and more money in order to get these different kinds of certifications, when in fact, you know, our energy costs continue to go up and up regardless of how good our envelope is. And so, you know, from a policy standpoint, does it make more sense to up the ante on these standards, or to consider some way of incentivizing green energy itself in a way that is helpful to the tenant? So, and I think that's something that Jake brought up there. If we can, you know, maybe in terms of using solar or some other kind of green energy resource that finds its way back to buying down the cost of the energy for the tenant, may be an important factor to discuss, at least, as opposed to always upping the ante on the standards that we're trying to meet.
This is Paula with Midwest Housing Development Fund. with the recovery dollars coming out, would there be a way for NIFA to look at if there are standards that you want to implement? Would that be something that maybe NIFA could offset that cost? Like maybe that could be your program, some sort of a pilot to check on things, to try different standards to find a way how to structure solar or wind, any sort of gray water, stop planting lawns and irrigating, like NIFA or IFA has points. They don't allow irrigation of the grass. Simple things like that, but maybe there's a way with some of the funds coming out that if there are things that NIFA and the board decide these are important, these are the right thing for us to do for our state with our funds, maybe there's a way to offset that so that it's not increasing the costs for the projects and definitely not for the tenants.
Well, Jay, copy again, it's just a very interesting point on, I mean, what we're running into with incorporated solar is just not having a real roadmap of how to incorporate it that, you know, meets sort of the objectives. And I mean, even when I talk to, there's national folks in the space and they don't have a good roadmap. So trying to think of, here's what solar means for us. Here's an example of how to incorporate it into a realistic project that would, whatever, that would, I mean, we're gonna create it in some, whether it's the right roadmap or not, we're gonna create some roadmap for it with our project in West Point, but it would be nice if we were turning to something and saying, okay, here's what we need to do. It either fits or doesn't fit in this case.
Rob Building Foundations Development, just to follow up on Paula's comment with Iowa and not having irrigation systems, they will also give you an 8823 for not being able to grow grass when you don't have sprinkler system built in.
Right.
So,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, so, I mean, let's take the whole picture into consideration of what we're gonna end up with. So.
Yeah, no, that's important.
Yeah,
Mike,
Mike, holding housing, couple things. First off, keep it simple, keep it reasonable. We have a 44 units of senior housing that's heated and cooled with a geothermal system. It's complicated. You can only call the right technicians to come out and look at it. It's not always simple what the problem is. I mean, and it's probably true when you got solar. So just keep that in mind. Energy Star wise, we buy Energy Star appliances today, water heaters, furnaces, we do blower tests. That's a very simple, easy one. The lead, I think, is only, it's a very high standard. As a commercial builder, I built for that a lot of times, but I don't think it's worth the money for what we're trying to build. Enterprise, I think about that. National Green Building Standards. Evidently, in the past, at one time, this was a state program. And when it shifted to national, it got to be more cumbersome. And that's when NIFA left that. I mean, things like we couldn't tear down a tree, an existing tree that was on a lot because of the national standards. So when it was state, we could. So there's some odd things that happened when it shifted. I don't know if it's that like that today or not, but just be cautious about what you go into on these new programs.
Todd, I think you had a.
I just really like that idea about some sort of shared sort of way to promote some types of innovation. I did a solar thermal project about 10 years ago now, and the only reason we did it, I mean, obviously we wanted to do it, but we were able to get a grant, and the grant paid for, the construction of the, a good, probably about half the cost. And we did it, and it saved money over the long term, but we haven't figured out how to do it without the grant. So having some sort of an incentive like that would be really neat, and would, I think would be a good way of getting data about, saving money on its common area utilities or for the residents. Either way, you can potentially, either save your tenants money or leverage more on the project. So that'd be super cool if you could figure out a way to do that.
Brent, did you have a comment?
Just a quick, yeah, Brent Williams, Excel. Just a quick comment on the Energy Star. A few years ago, you changed that to Energy Star and or equivalent thank you very much, especially with the latest Energy Star changes that just took effect. There are very few Energy Star appliances out there anymore, just because they're more efficient today than what the Energy Star rating is, and the cost to get the Energy Star rating. They don't do it anymore. So you're, instead of having a choice of 20 different refrigerators, you go Energy Star and you have 1 or 2. And that's it. Same thing with washer dryers. Well, they're just as efficient, but so if you put Energy Star and keep it in your QAP or equivalent, that was one of the better things you did on that amenity side. So I would highly recommend that you.
Of course, this year it's just nice to get any appliances.
That's true, Fred. Yeah.
Jim Reeker, do you have a comment? It looks like you have your hand raised if you want to unmute yourself.
Yeah, hopefully you can hear me. I got people working in my house making all kinds of noise. So I was on the CHAFA QAP, what they call TAG Committee, Technical Advisory Group. And as I think Brent mentioned, they're so heavy right now in trying to get to net zero in the near future. The one thing that we had several developers come to the table and brought out, everybody supported trying to get to net zero. That wasn't the issue. The issue is long-term maintenance. Your high efficiency HVAC systems, your low flow water, they all don't last nearly as long as what we've typically seen. So they were really pushing for an increase in expenses, especially in reserve requirements, because you can't, you're going to have to replace, for instance, they were talking about some of the developers, these low flow water faucets every 7 years because they calcify because there's not enough pressure to push the calcium out of them. The heat pumps, they were replacing every 6 to 7 years. So just something to keep in mind. I don't have any of their data, but I just know that's what they all came in. So you may be looking at more cost up front and ongoing expenses that are higher.
Any additional comments on this?
I just, this is Kathy again. I have one comment, and I know Jake and Cliff have visited quite a bit, but one of the ways that you can use, and if we can find a way to work some green energy stuff into our projects, I think it would be, would help us reconcile some of these other problems that we have with the usage of things that maybe have higher energy ratings but are difficult to maintain. But if you went to some usage of solar in the state of Nebraska, we have public power and there are some issues that are associated with this, but anything that is hooked on behind the meter is usable by the tenant. So if you have separate metering for your housing units, for instance, you can do some solar on the rooftops. But the other thing that has been easier for a lot of communities to accept is for them to implement some shared solar fields that then credit energy back to the individual households within a housing project. So there are ways to make that work if we can figure out where the funding can come from this and whether that's a good incentive to be able to put into our processes here. So.
Thank you, Cassie. Well, we are quickly closing in on noon. We could start some discussion regarding processes and thresholds and rounds and things like that. I think, but I would like to note that these sessions are being recorded. So if you didn't get to go to the first session, let us know and we will get you a copy of it so that you can watch it. Because obviously the last session, we didn't cover scoring so much, but we covered a lot of the process and the place. So just so that everyone will email me if you'd like it. We'll see if we can get it posted on the website, but if we can real quickly, one of the topics that we talked about was reducing to one round. We looked at, again, as I mentioned, we looked at other states in the area, and there were 12 states we looked at, and eight of those states just had one round. And we're looking at this for a couple of reasons. I mean, efficiency wise, it definitely could be a more efficient process if we were to do that. And it would also then, if you had home funds, there wouldn't be the worry of the second round not having anything available. So I mean, there's a lot of different benefits to that. We would suggest doing like a ranked alternates, so that if people turned in credits, we would have, you know, ranked down. At the same time, one of the things we talked about is we would score rural versus rural, and metro versus, or urban versus urban. We would keep them in separate categories. So keep that in mind with when you're thinking we're going to one round. We're really going to try to compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges. We don't really have a lot of time for a lot of discussion, but in regards to the one round, any comments on that?
Hey, Sarah, this is Matthew Danner with North Star Housing. I just wanted to speak as a proponent of the two-round system that NIFA currently has. I think, you know, obviously with home funds being an even more limited resource and other DED funds than the LIHTC is, you know, everybody applies for them in the first round, and obviously there's not enough to go around to give everybody what they're asking for. And so basically you're, you know, going to have to cover a gap at some point for the awardees who, you know, applied for home funds but didn't get them. I think the second round offers a good chance to level set, and I don't have the track record of knowing if home funds and DED funds are typically utilized always in the first round, but the second round, I think, gives a fair chance to level set for all the people who weren't awarded the home funds and to figure out how to gap that in the interim. And the fact that they're so, you know, temporally close to each other. I think this year the first round application was due at the beginning of February, and the second round due in May. I don't think there's an undue burden and the time disparity between the two to, you know, go back and re-underwrite your deal, and they're close enough to make it easier for developers to handle without, you know, spreading them out 6-8 months. So.
Thanks, Matthew.
I'm sorry, I was unavailable for Friday, so I understand there was good discussion on it. Just real quick, from my own standpoint, I would not be in favor of going to one round. I work in states that both have one round and two rounds. And the two rounds is a more efficient process for, I think, getting good projects out there and funded. One round is more efficient for the agency itself. But I think we need to look at the efficiency of housing and not just the agency. And I've got a lot of ideas on what you could probably do to make the two rounds more efficient, and some ideas if you do decide you want to go to one round of some changes that could be made from a timing standpoint and structurally. But we don't have time for that today, and I would welcome an opportunity to sit down, Sarah, with you and staff and discuss those with you, more so than just in a letter.
Well, and one of the things is that, I mean, keep in mind that it is more efficient for staff, but what part of our conversation about our efficiency is things like fees, because we can't make any changes to fees if we're not being the most efficient that we can be. So, I mean, we're not just wanting to do this just because it's less work for us. That's not the point. It's still gonna be the same amount of reviewing. It's just gonna change it a little bit. So that's not it. We just wanna be really, we're aware of we're trying to be more aware of what our costs are and how we can be efficient with our time to get back to you quickly, so you're not waiting forever. Things have changed quite a bit in the last few years, so.
No, and I didn't mean it in that way. I
No,
apologize
no,
if you took it
not
that
at
way.
all.
I'm talking more about timing efficiencies to, where we can hit construction, at the right time of year, where we can go out to bid at the right time of year, which gives the developers, a little more of a competitive advantage to going against commercial market rate stuff out there. And when you're having to go to bid, in June and July, the subs are gone for the year already. And the only way you're going to get someone to take on your project is if you just agree to pay them an exorbitant amount, because one, they're in short supply, and two, they're booked into the following year already. So it's looking at the timing of the application, timing of the award, timing of the carryover agreements, all of that. I know there are IRS guidelines as to some of those timings, but other states have been able to find ways to work around that, and I would be glad to share those with you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, we're at noon.
Should we order lunch in?
Are you buying?
Two routes in this one?
Thank you, everyone, and please feel free to email me with any suggestions. We'll try to put everything together so that it's available to either look at or be able to listen to online, and everyone can have access to. So thanks again.
Thank you for putting this on.
Yep, thank you.